Look over there. The sailor stood at the top of the mast, high above the captain. His hand pointed away from the ship, across the miles of ice that covered the sea. The captain looked to the north where the sailor was pointing. He saw something coming fast towards the ship across the ice. He put his telescope to his eye, and through it, he could see the shapes of 10 dogs pulling a sledge over the ice. He could also see the driver of the sledge, a huge figure much bigger than a man. The sledge came nearer and nearer to the sea. Soon, it was only 1/4 of a mile from the ship. No one needed a telescope now to see the huge figure of the driver. Suddenly, the sledge went behind a mountain of ice and disappeared. At that moment, another sledge appeared. It, too, was moving fast and was clearly chasing the first sledge. This driver was a smaller figure, more like an ordinary man. Faster and faster, the dogs ran. Then, the second sledge also disappeared behind the mountain of ice. 2 hours passed, and the sledges did not appear again. Nothing moved on the ice. Soon, night came, and in the night, there was a storm. In the morning, the sailors saw the great pieces of ice floating around the ship. Suddenly, the sailor on the mast shouted again, "Captain, I can see a man on the ice." The sailor was pointing to a piece of ice that was floating near the ship. A man was sitting on the ice, and near him was a broken sledge. The man was nearly dead from cold and could not walk. The sailors carried him carefully onto the ship and took him to the captain, who said, "Welcome to my ship. I am the captain, and my name is Robert Walton." "Thank you, Captain Walton," the man said. "My name is Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein." Then he fainted and said no more. 2 days passed before the man was strong enough to talk, and then the captain asked him to tell his story. "I am trying to catch someone," said Frankenstein. "That is why I have come so far north on the ice." "We saw you following someone," the captain said. "He was huge, much bigger than a man. We saw his sledge just in front of you on the night before the storm." "I am pleased you all saw that huge figure," Frankenstein said. "Perhaps that will help you to believe my story." During the days while the captain worked on the ship, Frankenstein wrote down his story, and each evening he read what he had written to the captain. Here is Victor Frankenstein's story. I was born in Switzerland, in the town of Geneva. My parents loved each other very much, and I learned from the example of their love. I learned that to love and to be patient are the most important things in the world. My mother hoped to have a daughter after I was born, but for 5 years, I was the only child. And then, my mother found a sister for me. She was helping her family, in which there were 5 children. They were very poor, and the children were thin and hungry. One of the children was a little girl with golden hair and blue eyes. Her name was Elizabeth. My mother took the little girl into our family, and Elizabeth became the daughter that my mother had always wanted. As I grew older, my love for Elizabeth became stronger all the time. Later, my mother had 2 other sons, Ernest, and William. A young woman called Justine came to live in the house to help my mother with the children. We loved her as much as she loved us. The years passed happily, and we had everything that we needed. At school, I met another very fine person named Henry Clerval, who was very clever. My family also liked him very much, so he was a welcome visitor to our house. I studied very hard at school. I wanted to know the secrets of life, and most of all, I wanted to know how to make living things. I read all the books that I could find. One day, something happened that added a new idea to the ideas that I already had. I was 15 at the time, and we were on holiday in the mountains. There was a wild storm, and with it came the most frightening thunder and lightning that I have ever seen in my life. About 20 meters in front of our house was a great tree. Suddenly, a huge fork of lightning hit the tree. After a few seconds, there was nothing left of it except a black piece of wood 2 meters high. The lightning had destroyed it. I saw how strong electricity was. I began to read all the books that I could find about electricity and its terrible power. For 17 years, my life was very happy. Then, the first sad thing happened. My mother became very ill, and soon she knew that she was dying. Just before she died, she asked Elizabeth and me to go to her room. She held our hands and said, "My children, I am very happy because you love each other, and because one day you will get married. Everyone in the family loves you, Elizabeth. Will you take my place in the family, my dear? I can die happy if you will look after them when I have gone." My mother died, and we were very sad because we loved her dearly. Elizabeth was brave and helped us. Her sweet smile gave her some happiness in the unhappy days after my mother's death. The time came for me to go to university. I did not want to leave my sad family, but we all knew that I should go. It was hard to leave, too, because the parents of my good friend Henry Clerval would not let him go to university with me. So I had to go alone. On my first day at the university, I met my teacher, Professor Waldman, who was one of the greatest scientists in the world. He gave a wonderful talk to all the students who were starting at the university. He ended his talk by saying, "Some of you will become the great scientists of tomorrow. You must study hard and discover everything that you can. That is why God made you intelligent, to help other people." After the professor's talk, I remembered the storm when I was 15. I remembered how the lightning had destroyed the tree. I wanted to use electricity to help people, and I wanted to discover the secrets of life. I decided to work on these two things. I did not know then that my work would destroy me and the people that I loved. I started work the next day. I worked very hard, and soon Professor Waldman and I realized that I could learn to be a very good scientist. The professor helped me very much, and other important scientists who were his friends helped me too. I was interested in my work, and I did not take one day's holiday during the next 2 years. I did not go home, and my letters to my family were very short. After 2 years, I had discovered many things, and I built a scientific machine that was better than anything in the university. My machine would help me answer the most important question of all: how does life begin? Is it possible to put life into dead things? To answer these questions about life, I had to learn first about death. I had to watch bodies from the moment when they died and the warm life left them in the hospital and in the university. I watched the dying and the dead day after day, month after month. I followed death. It was a dark and terrible time. Then, one day, the answer came to me suddenly. I was sure that I knew the secret of life. I knew that I could put life into a body that was not alive. I worked harder and harder. Now, I slept for only a short time each night, and I did not eat much food. I wrote to my family less often, but they loved me and did not stop writing to me. They said they understood how busy I was. They did not want me to stop working to write or to see them. They would wait until I had more time. They hoped to see me very soon. The professors realized that I was doing very important work, and so they gave me my own laboratory. There was a small flat above the laboratory where I lived, and sometimes I stayed inside the building for a week and did not go out. Above the laboratory, I built a very tall mast. It was 150 meters high and higher than the tallest building in the city. The mast could catch lightning and could send the electricity down to my machine. In the laboratory, I had never forgotten the lightning that had destroyed the tree. There had been so much power in the electricity of that lightning. I believed I could use that electricity to give life to things that were dead. I will say no more than that. The secret of my machine must die with me. I was a very clever scientist, but I did not realize then what a terrible mistake I was making. In my laboratory, I made a body. I bought or stole all the pieces of a human body that I needed, and slowly and carefully, I put them all together. I did not let anybody enter my laboratory or my flat while I was doing this awful work. I was afraid to tell anybody my terrible secret. I had wanted to make a beautiful man, but the face of the creature was horrible. Its skin was thin and yellow, and its eyes were as yellow as its skin. Its long black hair and white teeth were almost beautiful, but the rest of the face was very ugly. Its legs and arms were the right shape, but they were huge. I had to use big pieces because it was too difficult to join small pieces together. My creature was 2.5 meters tall. For a year, I had worked to make this creature, but now it looked terrible and frightening. I almost decided to destroy it, but I could not. I had to know if I could put life into it. I joined the body to the wires from my machine. More wires joined the machine to the mast. I was sure that my machine could use electricity from lightning to give life to the body. I watched and waited. 2 days later, I saw dark clouds in the sky, and I knew that a storm was coming. At about 1 o'clock in the morning, the lightning came. My mast began to do its work immediately, and the electricity from the lightning traveled down the mast to my machine. Would the machine work? First, nothing happened, but after a few minutes, I saw the creature's body begin to move slowly. Terribly, the body came alive. Its arms and legs began to move, and slowly it sat up. The dead body had been an ugly thing, but alive, it was much more horrible. Suddenly, I wanted to escape from it. I ran out of the laboratory and locked the door. I was filled with fear at what I had done. For hours, I walked up and down in my flat. At last, I lay down on my bed and fell asleep, but my sleep was full of terrible dreams, and I woke up suddenly. The horrible thing that I had created was standing by my bed. Its yellow eyes were looking at me. Its mouth opened, and it made strange sounds at me. On its yellow face, there was an awful smile. One of its huge hands reached towards me. Before it could touch me, I jumped off the bed and ran downstairs into the garden. I stayed there all night, but I could not think clearly. I was afraid. And when morning came, I went out into the town and began to walk about. I did not notice where I was walking, but soon I came to the train station. A train from Geneva had just arrived, and the passengers were leaving the station. One of them ran towards me when he saw me. It was my dear friend Henry Clerval. He was very pleased to see me. He took my hand and shook it warmly. "My dear Victor," he said, "what a lucky chance that you are here at the station. Your father and Elizabeth and the others are very worried about you because you have not visited them for a long time. They asked me to make sure that you are well, and I have very good news. My father has agreed to let me study at the university, so we shall be able to spend a lot of time together." I was very happy to hear this news, and for a moment, I forgot my fears. I took Henry back to my flat and asked him to wait outside while I went in to look. I was afraid that the creature was still there, but it had disappeared. At that time, I did not think of other people and what the creature could do to them. I took Henry into the flat and cooked a meal for us. But Henry noticed how thin I was and that I was laughing too much and could not sit still. Suddenly, he said, "My dear Victor, what is the matter with you? Are you ill? Has something awful happened?" "Don't ask me that," I cried. I put my hands over my eyes. I thought I could see the horrible creature there in front of me. I pointed wildly across the room and shouted, "He can tell you. Save me, save me." I tried to fight the creature, but there was nothing there. Then, I fainted and fell to the floor. Poor Henry, I do not know what he thought. He called a doctor, and they put me to bed. I was very ill for 2 months, and Henry stayed and looked after me. His loving care saved me from death. I wanted to go home and see my family as soon as possible. When I was well enough, I packed my clothes and books. All my luggage was ready, and I was feeling very happy when the postman arrived with some letters. One of the letters ended my short time of happiness. The letter was from my father in Geneva, and this is what he wrote. "My dear Victor, I want you to know before you arrive home that an awful thing has happened. Your dear youngest brother, William, is dead. He was murdered. It happened last Thursday evening when Elizabeth and I, and your two brothers, Ernest and William, went for a walk outside the city. William and Ernest were playing, and William had hidden from Ernest. Ernest asked Elizabeth and me to help find William. We all began to search for him, but we couldn't find him. We searched all night, and at 5 a.m, I found him. He was lying on the grass, white and still. I could see the marks of fingers on his neck. The murderer had strangled him. Elizabeth had let him wear a gold chain of hers round his neck. On the chain was a very small picture of your mother. We all think that someone murdered William to steal the gold chain. Poor Elizabeth is terribly unhappy at William's death. She thinks she died because she let him wear the chain. Hurry home, my dear Victor. You are the only one who can help Elizabeth and me. We all need you. With all our love. Your father, Henry. I decided to tell the police about the monster, but I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. They might think it was just one of my bad dreams due to my illness. So, I kept the knowledge to myself and returned home to my family. They were delighted to see me but informed me that the police had found the murderer. However, there was a twist. Justine, the young woman who had looked after the children and was like a sister to us, had been arrested by the police a few days after the murder. They had found the gold chain in Justine's coat pocket. Everyone in the family knew that Justine had not murdered William. I knew who the real murderer was, but I couldn't share the truth with anyone. We believed that Justine would be acquitted after the trial because nobody could believe she was a murderer. Unfortunately, the trial didn't go well for her. There were some strange facts that were hard to explain, and the judge concluded that she was the murderer. The punishment for murder was death. We argued and cried, trying to convince the judge of her innocence, but nothing could change his decision. Filled with guilt, I went to the judge's house early in the morning. I told him about the monster, hoping he would believe me and reconsider Justine's case. However, he thought I was lying to save Justine's life and didn't believe my story. Justine waited calmly in prison for her impending death. We spent many hours with her, and she remained kind and gentle. She was content knowing that we believed in her innocence and looked forward to joining William and our dear mother in a place of peace. Her love and gentleness only added to my deep unhappiness. I knew she was going to die because of me. I knew my brother had died because of me. I had brought nothing but sadness and misery to my family. One day in summer, a lady on horseback rode up to the house and knocked on the door. She had dark hair and was very beautiful. The family were all very pleased to see her. I soon learned that her name was Sophie. She could not speak the family's language, and each evening Felix taught us some words. This was a very great help to me because I was able to learn the meaning of many words that I had not been able to understand before. Felix taught Sophie from books about what had happened in the world in the past, so I learned about the Greeks and Romans, and about Christ and the first white men in America, and the sad story of the Indians. I could not understand why men who knew all about good and evil could hate and kill each other. I learned other things too. I learned that people think it is very important to have money and to come from a good family. I learned of the love between mother and father and child, and I realized that I had no family. The more I learned, the more I thought, and the more unhappy I became. Soon, I discovered who Sophie was. The two families had met in France after Sophie and her father arrived there from Turkey, her own country. Sophie's father was put in prison by the French, but Felix and his father had helped him to escape and leave France. When the French discovered this, Felix and his family lost all their lands and money and had to leave France forever. Now I knew why they were so sad and why they were poor. But that was not all. Sophie and Felix loved each other, and Sophie's father had promised that they could marry. Then when he learned that Felix had lost all his money, he broke his promise. But Sophie loved Felix very much, so she took some money and escaped from her father to search for Felix. I had learned to love these good people, and I could not wait another day to introduce myself. I decided to speak first to the father because he was blind and would not be frightened by my terrible face and body. One day, the three young people went for a walk while the old man rested. When they had gone, I went to the door of the house and knocked on it. The old man told me to enter and to sit down. "Thank you," I said. "I am a traveler and I'm tired and sad. I have no family or friends. The people that I want to have as my friends have never seen me. If they don't take me into the home, I shall be alone in the world." "Don't be so sad," the old man said. "You will find that the hearts of men are full of love. If these friends are good people, they will welcome you. They are kind and the best people in the world." I said, "But when they meet me, they may not see a kind creature who has helped them. Instead, they may see a monster and they will hate me. That mustn't happen." The old man said, "My family and I have had our difficult times, and we'll help you. You are a very good man." I said, "And if you help me, I shall be able to live with my friends and enjoy their love." At that moment, I heard the young people returning from their walk. I caught the old man's hand and cried, "Now is the time. Save me and help me. You and your family are the friends that I am talking about." Then the door opened, and in came Felix, Sophie, and Agatha. Their faces were filled with horror and fear when they saw me. Agatha fainted, and Sophie ran out of the house. Felix ran forward and pulled me away from his father. He threw me to the ground and hit me again and again with his heavy stick. I did not lift a hand against him. I did not want to hurt him or any of them. My heart was heavy, and all hope left me. I ran out of the house and later returned silently to my heart. Nobody saw me. I sat in my dark hut and felt both angry and sad. One half of me wanted to hurt the people who had hurt me. The other half of me still loved them. In the end, I decided to try and speak to the old man again. I fell into an unhappy sleep, but when I woke in the morning, the family had gone. They had left the house during the night. I knew the name of only one other person, although I had seen you, Frankenstein, for only a few moments. I knew that I belonged to you. When I had left your house, I picked up a small bag. There was a book in the bag, and I could now read it. From it, I learned my Creator's name and address. You had made me, but why had you not looked after me and saved me from this pain and unhappiness? I decided to go to Geneva to find you. One day as I was traveling, I saw a young girl running along the side of a river. Suddenly, she fell into the water. I jumped into the river, fought against the fast-moving water, and brought her back to land. While I was doing this, the girl's father, who was looking for her, reached us. He was carrying a gun, and when he saw me, he fired. The bullet hit my arm and broke it. I fell to the ground in great pain, and the man and the girl ran into the woods as fast as they could and left me. The bullet was deep in my arm, and I lost a lot of blood. After some days, my arm began to get better, but I became sadder and angrier than before. I had saved the girl's life, and how did they thank me? With a bullet in the arm. I began to realize that there was no happiness for me in life. Hate grew stronger in me every day, hate for you, my Creator, who had made me. 2 months later, I reached Geneva. That evening, I hid among some trees outside the town and went to sleep. But I woke when a little boy ran into my hiding place. I thought I would catch the child and make him my friend before he was old enough to be frightened of my terrible face. I caught the little boy, but when the child saw me, he covered his eyes with his hands and screamed loudly. "Let me go, you monster," the child shouted. "Let me go, or I will tell my father, Mr. Frankenstein. He will call the police, and they'll punish you." "Frankenstein," I shouted. "You belong to my enemy, the man that I want to hurt." The child fought and screamed, and I put my hand around his neck to stop him shouting. In a moment, the child lay dead at my feet. I looked down at his body and was pleased with what I had done. I knew that the death of this child would hurt you, Victor Frankenstein, my Creator. Then I saw something bright around the child's neck. It was a gold chain, and on the end of it was a picture of a very beautiful woman. I knew that a beautiful woman would never smile at me, and I wanted to run into Geneva and kill as many people as I could. But I stopped myself and went to look for another hiding place. Soon, I found a hut which seemed to be empty, but when I entered, I saw a pretty young woman asleep on the floor. I hated her because she was pretty. So I put the gold chain into one of her pockets, and then, before she could wake up, I ran away. I knew the police would think that she had killed the little boy. Victor Frankenstein continues his story. The monster finished telling me his story, and then he said, "I am alone and miserable. Only someone as ugly as I am could love me. You must make another creature like me, a woman monster, to be my wife. I shall never make another creature like you. I shouted. You have done enough evil on your own. If you don't help me, I shall make you more miserable than you have ever been in your life. You will wish you were dead. The monster said, But if you make another monster to be my friend, we won't hurt anyone. Be kind to me now, and I will learn to love and be kind. I thought long and hard about the monster's words. I felt sorry for him, he was so miserable. Perhaps I should help him. I shall do what you ask, I told him. But you must promise to live somewhere in the world where nobody lives. You must promise to stay away from other people. I promise, he cried. Please start your work. I shall watch you, and when you are ready, you can be sure I will come back. He turned and left me, running down the mountain. I went back to Geneva immediately. My family was very worried when they saw me. I was pale, my eyes were wild. I could not forget my promise to the monster and the awful work that waited for me. But I had to do it, it was the only way to keep my family safe from his murdering hands around their necks. I needed to study for several months to make a woman monster successfully. I heard that an English scientist had done some useful work, so I decided to go to England. Before I went, my father asked me, Are you going to marry Elizabeth, or do you love another woman? Is this why you are so unhappy? No, father, I replied. I have always loved Elizabeth, and I want to marry her. But I must do one more piece of scientific work before we can marry. I must go to England to do the work, and I want to marry Elizabeth when I return. My father and Elizabeth did not want me to go to England alone because I had been so ill. They spoke to my old friend Henry Clerval, and he was very happy to travel with me. I was pleased that he could come, although I did not want him to discover anything about my horrible work. Henry and I reached London in early October and stayed there for a few months. I met and talked with English scientists and learned many useful things from them. Then Henry was invited to visit some friends in Scotland. I planned to travel with him, but I told him that I wanted to go walking in the mountains alone. Henry was not happy with my plan, but in the end, he agreed. I bought all that I needed for a laboratory and sent everything to Scotland. Henry and I traveled to Edinburgh together, and then I went further north to find a good place for my laboratory. At last, I found the right place on an island off the north coast. It was a wild and lonely place, only 5 people lived on the island, so I could work alone and nobody would discover my awful secret. There was a large empty hut on the island, and I brought builders from Scotland to make the hut into a laboratory for me. I showed them how to build my mast, and soon everything was ready for me to start work on the woman monster. One evening, 2 months later, I was sitting in my laboratory. Most of my work was done, and I could finish the woman monster that night. But I wondered if I should finish the work. Was I making a monster more evil than the first creature? perhaps 1,000 times more evil. How could I know? Perhaps the woman monster would be another murderer. She had not promised to stay away from other people. Perhaps the two monsters would hate each other and would kill and murder and destroy without end. As I thought these things, I looked up at the window. Suddenly, in the moonlight, I saw the monster's awful face looking at me, and in his yellow eyes, I could see only hate and evil. I knew he would not keep his promise. I went over to the laboratory table where the new creature was lying. I pulled off the wires that joined her to my machine. I took a sharp knife and cut through the body that I joined together so carefully. Through the window, the monster saw me destroy his woman with a loud and miserable scream of sadness and lost hope. He ran into the laboratory. "You have destroyed all my hopes of happiness," he cried. "You have left me with one feeling, hate, and with one wish, to destroy your happiness. You will be sorry that you were ever born. Remember this, I shall be with you on your wedding night." He ran quickly out of the laboratory, and I watched him as he left the island in his boat and sailed away across the sea. I sat and cried as I thought of the danger to Elizabeth, but I knew that the monster would not visit us until our wedding night. I would not die easily, and I would try to kill him before he could kill me. The next morning, I received a letter from Henry. He told me that he was waiting for me to return. I decided to clear the laboratory and to leave the island on the following day. So, I returned to the laboratory where the pieces of the woman monster's body still lay on the floor. I put them all in a large bag with some heavy stones. Then I took the bag to my boat and sailed out to sea. I threw the bag into deep water and watched it disappear. I was happier than I had felt for months. I knew I had done the right thing, and now there would be no second monster to follow the first. I was very tired, and I went to sleep in the boat. I do not know how long I slept, but when I woke up, I was in the middle of a storm. The wind was driving me further out to sea, and my boat began to fill with water. I knew I was in great danger. After some hours, the storm passed, and I saw land to the south. Soon, I could see the beach and a crowd of people standing and watching me. The faces were cold and unfriendly. As I landed, 4 of the men came towards me and took me by the arms. "We are taking you to Mr. Cohen, the judge," one of the men told me. I was sad to hear of the murder, but I did not worry about it. I had been far away at the time and knew nothing about any murder. It would be easy to explain that. So, I went with the men to the large house where Judge Cohen lived. The judge was an old, kind man, but his face was very serious as he looked at me. He asked a number of men to tell me what they had seen and found the night before. The first man told his story. He and his son were coming home from a long day's fishing. It was a dark night, and on the beach, they had stumbled over the dead body of a man. They had carried the body to the nearest house and found that it was a good-looking young man, about 25 years old. There were marks of fingers round his neck. When they spoke of the marks of fingers, I remembered the murder of my brother, and I felt a terrible fear. The son then told his story. He had seen a boat with a man in it not far from the beach. He thought it was my boat. A woman had also seen a man in a boat sailing away from the beach. She thought I was the man. Then, I was taken to the room where the dead body lay. How can I tell you what I felt when I saw the body? I put my arms around it and cried, "What have I done, my friend, my dear friend?" The body was Henry Clerval's, and so now I had destroyed another person. This third death was too much for me. I fell down in a kind of madness, and they had to carry me from the room. For 2 months, I was very ill and wished only to die. But slowly, my madness left me, and my health began to return. At last, I was able to speak to Judge Cohen, and I asked for news of my family. "There is someone here who can answer your question better than I can," he said. "Your father arrived a few minutes ago and is waiting to see you for the first time since Henry's death." I felt some happiness. I held out my hands to my father as he came into the room, and he took me in his arms. He gave me the good news that Elizabeth and Ernest were safe and well. I was really too ill to travel, but I asked my father to take me home immediately. The police had found somebody who had seen me on my island at the time of the murder, and so the judge let me go free. My father looked after me on the long journey home and sat with me for every minute, night after night, while I was asleep. I shouted that I was the murderer of William, Justine, and Henry. My father asked me why I said these awful things. I wanted to answer his question, but I could not tell him my terrible secret. He thought that I was still a little mad. We stayed for a few days in Paris on the way home, and Elizabeth wrote to me at our hotel. This is what her letter said. "My dear Victor, I am so happy to know that you will soon be home, but I'm afraid that Henry's death is not the only reason for your sadness. Do you still want to marry me, or do you love another woman? You must tell me. I love you, Victor, and I dream of the day when I shall be your wife. But I do not want you to marry me just because your parents wanted it. I can only be happy if you are happy. Do not answer this letter. Wait until you arrive before you give me your answer. But if you are well, and if I can make you smile, I need nothing more to make me happy. With all my love, Elizabeth."